Welcome back, everybody. So our first keynote workshop of the day, followed by another 3 keynote workshops, which is going to finalize this fantastic 2-day HSE North America Virtual Congress 2020. I'm honored to have Mr. CPitzer here to lead a workshop on the Holy Grail in safety, predicting and preventing fatality. So Corey, I'm going to hand this over to you for the first workshop of the day.
Thank you very much. My name is CPitzer. I work from Vancouver, Canada, which is the background behind me. And I want to talk to you about what I call the Holy Grail in safety. Can we predict and prevent accidents, fatal accidents specifically? And of course, that's the whole purpose of what we do in safety. But is it actually possible? And so I want to play with this idea a little bit. I got 30 minutes. To give you an insight into a really complex topic. But I hope you enjoy this. And I'm going to start with a fatal accident, a catastrophic event that happened in Canada. This happened on the 6th of July, 2013. And it was a train accident. Now, there's many train accidents around the world. This is a cargo train. But the train stopped about a couple of miles outside of a little town called Unsinkable for an overnight shift change. And it was parked on a little bit of a gradient. 0.9% was completely imperceptible to the driver. It doesn't really matter because he parks the train, he puts the air brakes on, and then he gets onto the train and he also onto the wagons, and it was fuel tankers, and he engages 7 tankers mechanical brakes, standard practice. He gets in the cab and he drives off to a little town called Nantes, where he's going to overnight. During that night, about 10 to 11, he stopped. The driver sets the air brakes and he sets the mechanical brakes. And those are the fuel tankers. The driver of the cab reported smoke and little oil droplets, and the guy said, yeah, there's a problem with the engine. Repairs are in the past, but don't worry about it. So sometime later, the locos caught a fire and somebody reported it. So a 911 call at 11:30, the fire brigade came in and shut the loco off and extinguished the fire. They let the company called Minnesota Main Rail Company, MMA, they let them know that the loco is shut down. They said, no worries, the mechanical brakes will still hold the train there. But the mechanical brakes failed, one after the other, because of the massive weight of this train, and the train starts rolling. And it hit the town of Unsinkable at about 63 miles an hour. And that is the town before. And that was what the town looked like the next day. Completely wiped out in the center of the town. The train derailed in the center of the town, and 47 people were killed in their sleep. Now, should this have been known? Of course, when you look at any accident, and everybody looks at it and says, it was an accident waiting to happen. Heard this that line of thinking so many times. Well, that is a picture of what train lines, cargo train lines in North America looks like every day. There's an enormous amount of trains parked overnight, running intersections, etc. Now, these particular causation factors of this event are actually in place pretty much around the country and now around the continent every day. And this would be the typical factors of this event. But there are many, many more reasons why a train can derail, or accidents can happen, fire explosions can happen. There are probably an unknown number. But let's say that represents this unknown number of possible causal factors. Well, those can be identified. Those can be, to some degree, be predicted because we know the circumstances. Well, it so happened that one of those factors, while everybody was focusing on the reasons that caused this accident, massive investigation, multitude of other factors were left unattended. And one of them, or relatively unattended, one of them came into action 6 months later, when in Ottawa, on the 18th of September, a train, a cargo train, clipped the front end of a bus at an intersection. 6 people killed. 1 second later, that full bus would have been destroyed and 82 people would have been killed. Double the amount that was killed in La Mégantic on a completely different scenario. And in fact, 1 second earlier, that would have been the situation and no one would have been even talking about this. So this is the reality of these kind of events. And La Mégantic is one example of 27 cases that I've studied and researched over many years now, in which these organizations were actually very, very safe. My classic example is the Titanic-like organization. And you all remember the line, "We believe our ship is safe, it's unsinkable," while the ship was actually sinking. Many, many organizations around the world believe to be unsinkable. And here are just a few of them. We have disasters that happened in the North Sea, Piper Alpha, very well-known ones. DuPont, the claimed safest organization in the world, had a disaster. North Park's mine was actually receiving the Minix Award in Australia as the safest mine in Australia in 1999. 4 months later, 4 people killed in a disaster. These organizations, these 27 organizations, were all sharing a proud feeling about safety. They were proud about their achievements in safety. They were committed to safety. People focused in these organizations on elimination of the at-risk behavior of workers and focus on compliance. They were advanced in technology systems, audits, and enforcement. And the most common factor was that they all measured safety by their accident rates, and they all were closer and closer to zero. One of the executives of MMA, the company that owned this train in La Mégantic, declared publicly at one point before the accident, "We operate practically at zero." These are examples of well-managed companies. Now, when we talk about data, these are well-managed companies in the United States. This is an industry. This is phenomenal data. This is an arrangement of 28 of those organizations in the United States. Between them employ about 6 million people. The top performers, the best companies in this is the left bottom, DART rate or lost time injury rate, the best in the industry, and the worst performers on the other side. Over 12 years, there were 34 fatal accidents. Where do you think these fatal accidents occurred? They occurred like that over 12 years. And this is profound because 62% of the accidents, 21 of those 34, happened with the best organizations. And these organizations were all suffering from what I call the black triangle of safety performance. They were all having reportable injury rates coming down and serious injury rates going up. Now, the opposite of that is reportable rates going up and serious injuries coming down. Is that the ideal? I put it to you that it is the ideal. If you have an increasing accident rate, small accident rate, you actually have a high level of transparency in your organization. And here's the bottom line for me. Can you achieve low accident rates in both terms, small trivial accidents and serious accidents? My answer to that is no, you can't. It is a choice. You either focus on small accidents and you eradicate them, or you focus on fatal accidents. But here's the problem. The more we focus on lost time accidents and small accident organization, the less capable we are to look at fatal accidents. And here's the reason. We can't achieve both because they are from different causation models. What causes small accidents is not what kills people. There's a small proportion of small accidents that actually are also fatal potential. Most of them are from different causation models, and we know that. The remedies for small accidents actually adds complexity and leads to more serious accidents. I'll talk about that in a moment. And by eliminating small accidents, we're eliminating the warning signals that the system's pressures is starting to be reached. They are actually early warning signals in any system. It removes the indicators of the operational limits. So if everything goes smoothly, we don't know what the operational limits are, but when a small accident happens, we suddenly pick up what those limits are, and we can operate within that. And unfortunately, this is the most important. It creates a myopic focus on what we know already in the organization. What kills people is not necessarily always what we all know already. It is increasingly more and different kind of accidents, more complex ones that we don't always understand, appreciate the complexity of it. Managing beyond small accidents allows for the exploration of techniques. It creates risk skills in the organization and an increased willingness to expose. If we accept that small accidents, finger cuts, and those kind of accidents in the organization are not vital to the organization or the individual, they actually lead to some outcomes that will prevent serious accidents. Now, if you have a look at maturity of organizations, this is very well-known models like this in business, but what, in my experience, those organizations, La Maison Ticks, all those 27 organizations, they reach this level of what I call responsible level of safety, where they start to focus on safety as a value. Safety is the right thing to do. But what they can't break through is that wall, because they are stuck, and we are stuck with these reactive kind of safety approaches and technologies and models and mindsets. And the harder we drive them, the more damage we actually cause in the culture of the organization. And we start to shift our organization's culture into what I call restrained, deluded, and distracted levels of an organization's culture. Now, if you have a look at that kind of outcome, this is where I think those 27 organizations were sitting. The ideal organization is the organization that is reliable, resilient, and what I call restless, chronically unease. And we hear that so often as well. But these three types of organization, just use my terminology for it, I call them system 1, the reactive kind of organization. I call system 2, the restrained, deluded organization. And I call this restless organization system 3. Now, this brings me to a concept that I call the coefficient of chronic unease. And this coefficient I developed after a period of 2 years now, when I spent time with an organization looking at the elimination of fatalities. And we had a process that we deployed in the organization, and we engaged with about 8,000 people. This organization is very large, 100,000 people roughly, with 40 operating units, businesses around the world. And we talked to 8,000 people, and we used what I call a 6Y lens of fatal risks. And this lens consists of 6 ways in which we engage with risk. Risks are overlooked, underestimated, rewarded, inherent, balanced with production pressures, and tolerated. If you look at these risks in these lenses, you actually start to uncover an amazing situation. We didn't focus at all on likelihood. We only looked at what is possible. And we did some risk culture analysis like I just showed you, and we identified literally hundreds and hundreds of fatal risk exposures. If you take likelihood out of the equation, these risks were sitting there and were possible. Now, that data is what I've analyzed, and I call them latent triggers. So looking at all this information, what are the common things that distinguishes an organization in terms of high maturity system 3 type organization or system 2 destructive kind of culture in the organization? And I worked with 2 gentlemen, Brian and Mike, on this model. And after about 3-4 months of research work, this model came forth. And I want to share this model with you. These are the 7 key characteristics of factors that is going to give us an indication of the increase or decrease in risk exposure, fatal risk exposure. What is the level of risk transparency in the organization? I'll talk a little bit about that. What is the width of serious injury, fatal and catastrophic risk focus? Are we narrowing our focus in terms of what we already know, or do we have a dynamic look at potential risk in our organization? What is the depth of self-challenge? The direction of injury rates, like I just explained to you, in terms of the black triangle, the golden triangle, and the ratio of upstream or downstream risk control. Where do we focus our risk reduction effort into in terms of, is it either downstream in terms of barriers and protections, or upstream is it in terms of inherent risk reduction? What type of compliance exists in the organization? Is there an agile kind of compliance where people are focused on risk and compliance, but challenging the situations, thinking about risk in a more proactive way? And what is the mindset of accident causation? Where do we look for risk causation, accident causation in the organization? And these 3 levels are applied to each of these factors. So for instance, in the first one, level of risk transparency, what the data showed is contained in these 3 test questions. So I've developed an analysis technique where an organization can then analyze itself. And there's a way that we do this. And this is one of the question sets that we pose to participants in the organization. What is your assessment of what happens with near-miss reporting? We have very few, if any, near-miss reports. We have many near-miss reports and more than 3 hideable ones for every non-hideable one. Now, this is a very important measure. Non-hideable means that there was property damage, and I'll show you an example in a moment. Property damage, and there's nothing that, let me just show you with the example. And the third one is we have some near-miss reports, and most are of such a nature that it could not be hidden. So here is the example of a accident like that. So they are busy slinging a pump, and the pump has got to fit, the bottom pipe has got to fit on the onto the pump pipe that's on the pump, and they have to align the slot holes for the bolts. Now you can see that it's slung with a crane overhead, and the workers are now having to put the first bolt through the holes in order to line this pump up. Now just look at what happens. Guy is putting the bolt in now, and at this stage, the sling starts to slip. And the pump crashes down. They make it out in time. The pump crashes down and nearly kills somebody. Now, when you look at the situation here, where would you classify that? Well, if they report this, and they have to report this because there's a pump damage, etc., it will be probably in the range of 3 or 1, because it is something that can't be hidden. Now, when you look at the way we measure safety, and safety is measured, and this is a model of Eric Holnagel. That is a very powerful model of where we target our measurements in terms of safety performance. The first level is the factual level, and it is the level where we learn what happened. Like in this example, what happened. The next level is the actual performance as we go on, what is actually happening. This is the in the moment performance of the organization, and that's where we can measure, for instance, how critical controls in the organizations are operating, and so that's actual. Then, but this is in the reaction mode. There is a causal mode before that, and that is what caused things to happen. And this is the level of action, investigation, and analysis. But then we start moving and shifting into the future. What happens next? And this is what is probable in the organization. And this is at the more proactive level. And then you go to what is called the possible level. What else can happen? And this is probably what I just termed the prognostic level. Now, when you look at the improbable, the level beyond that, what is possible? What is improbable, but you can imagine it is possible. And that is the preemptive level. Now, all of these levels are very important in terms of safety performance. Our lost time injury rates, our reportable injury rates is what tells us what happened. The root cause analysis tells us why things happened. And you have this high potential incidents or near miss events. This is what happened, what is happening. And it's still reactive. And then the term I use there, non-hideable potential hazards. So this is the area of what happens next. And then you get to the possible, the hideable high potential accidents. And that's where the fatal risk exposures are sitting. The the catastrophic risk exposure is right at the front end. So these are lagging indicators. These are typically called leading indicators. And this is what I call latent indicators. Now, I don't think that there's much space for us in leading indicators. It's actually still lagging indicators. If a pump drops and it causes damage, it's non-hideable, that's a lagging, it's already happened. Near misses are not predictive indicators. They are reactive. And it is pretty difficult for us to move into what is this real latent indicator level. Now, when you look at an organization, in terms of predicting fatal risk events, we have a pretty good idea that when we look at things like top left there in my picture is slinging, there's fatal risk exposure associated with that. There's working at heights, working on scaffolding. That's a traffic intersection that may cause fatal risk exposures. So we have ranges of these kind of exposures that we, from experience, know are associated with fatal risk exposures. But there's a more dynamic level that we now need to consider, and this is the level of the organization's exposure in terms of its culture, the kind of factors I just showed you, those 7 factors. And these factors are not so clear. They come and go, they expose, they reduce, they are dynamic in nature. And this is what we need to be able to capture if we want to understand what this exposure is really all about. And unfortunately, in the safety profession, we're very much trapped in reactive thinking, in reactive analysis, and looking at trends in our business that already happened and wanting to project into the future the continuation of those trends. Now, this is, if I can use a medical model, this is like in the medical profession, they look at health indicators and they measure heart attacks. If you don't have a heart attack, there's nothing to project. You're safe, you're healthy. But that's not how the medical model works. The medical model goes upstream in the human body. You start looking at the pulse rate. You start looking at blood pressure. You start looking at artery calcification. You're looking at ECG analysis. That's the upstream analysis in a health context, which we are so far away in a safety management context. We are looking largely, in most organizations, we are looking at the rate of having heart attacks in our organization. And this kind of indicators that I'm talking about are into this mode of ECG analysis in the organization. Now, this is just a little model that I use to show how how the factors that I showed, those 7 factors, can either show the organization's fatal risk exposure is emerging, escalating, or can be extensive, or it can be receding, reduced, or retained. Now, so far, the research into this shows some very interesting indicators. So, for instance, organizations that are considering themselves best in class, world class, especially exploring and applying untested ideas. This is by level of approach and safety performance. This is the organizations that are reporting more receding risk exposures. Organizations that are more in the emerging and escalating, in this case escalating, organizations that are typically seeing themselves as behind other organizations, but trying, or right in the middle and average. And if you have a look at by approach to control, organizations that are typically looking at themselves as innovating and implementing new technology in terms of safety thinking are organizations that are also assessing themselves more in terms of system 3 levels, more in terms of receding risk exposures. So the focus of this kind of indicators, what you see there on the screen are typically what I just explained are the typical indicators that exist in the restrained organization or the system 2 organization. And the system 3, the restless kind of organization, each of those factors are in a different mode, in a different level. They, in the first instance, see fatal risk secrecy. They have high levels of risk transparency. For every one near miss event that could not be hidden, they actually have reports of 4 that could easily be hidden. So people are very open and transparent with reporting. They got very dynamic focus on fatal risks. They're not just projecting what happened in the past. They challenge themselves and they distrust their risk systems fundamentally, and they challenge those systems. They actually have increasing rates in small accidents and decreasing rates in serious accidents. Their focus on risk reduction is strongly upstream in the organization. There's a balance. You can't eliminate all risk, but you can have a balance of for every time that you have a risk assessment, that you have a look at where do you control that risk. Instead of a cult of compliance, they are fearlessly challenging each other, right from the bottom up into the organization. And instead of humans are the cause of all evil in our organization, because they so they make mistakes and they have accidents, they look for causation upstream in the organization. Now, my very first job was in an organization which I think can be regarded as this kind of organization. And it was an underground platinum mine in South Africa where I started my career as a human resource manager, trained as a psychologist, but then sent underground to go and do my training underground to get a blasting ticket. And it was in this environment where you go underground and you can go up to 3,000 meters underground. And my stope was going through these kind
traveling at 6 meters per second. There are 3 shafts. We're going down the first shaft, then we're going to go a long ways, then down the second, and then down the third. You experience your ears blocking now.
And you end up in a working place 8 hours a day like this, 1 meter high, 35 to 40 degrees Celsius, and above you, 2,500 meters of rock. In this environment, you cannot be in the system 2 mode. You have to have a focus that is absolutely restless, and you have to have those kind of fatal risk exposures in terms of this preemptive, proactive mode. The typical answer in safety approach is very much preventing injury. And as we start to become more sophisticated in our thinking, we move our thinking more into behaviors of people. But this is still at the downstream end and the blame end of the organization. When we start looking at the processes in the organization that delivers those behaviors, the systems that is associated with those processes, but even more upstream is the value level, the mindset level of the organization. This is the level where these indicators operate, and where it is possible increasingly, I think, not to predict actual events, but to be more predictive of our exposure as we move forward into that mode of thinking. So that is my my presentation. I hope I could have achieved some sort of clarity in 30 minutes.